Hey, this is the third devlog for my roguelike deck building twin stick shooter, which I'm still just calling CardCrawler, at least until I work up the nerve to just commit to a better name. This month was, well, a month. I had a lot of stress at work, and I got sick not once, but twice. Nothing serious, just your standard cold, but I got it twice in the same month, so that was really neat. Anyway, despite all that, I did actually manage to accomplish pretty much everything I aimed for this month, which was pretty cool. I think this is officially the longest I've ever stuck with a single game dev project, at least without throwing it all out and starting completely over, and it's really been gratifying to see stuff come together. And to actually be checking off large numbers of tasks from the to-do list, and to start to really have something that I'm kind of excited to share and show off. If anyone's in the same boat where I was, I highly recommend picking a simple, fun concept, something that's exciting to you, strip away any of the extra non-essential features and put them in a list called "Maybe Someday I'll Make a Sequel," and give yourself like 6 months to make a game. It's done wonders for my motivation, focus, and determination. Alright, so this month. Well, the most obvious change, the game now officially has a boss. Meet the Caddisfly Queen, the simplest concept for a boss that I could come up with, which has all the elements that I wanted to implement into a boss template, which I can now use for future bosses. You enter a room, see a big old hole in the middle of the room, and have just a second to wonder what could be in there before this big old nasty bug pops out. Her art is not final, more on that later, but I was kind of going for a termite queen kind of thing, with her abdomen all distended and full of eggs. Speaking of which, when she comes out, she works her way around the room, lays a few eggs, which burst to reveal caddisfly drones, tiny annoying buggers who swoop and dive at you, and then goes back to hide in her hole. Once all the eggs and drones are gone, the queen will reemerge to lay another wave. Fighting her then is pretty straightforward. You just need to juggle fighting off the drones, attacking the eggs to break them directly and prevent the drones inside from emerging, and attacking her directly to actually do damage to end the fight. The lower her health gets, the faster she moves, and the more eggs she lays each wave, so there should be plenty of space early in the fight for you to learn how stuff works, and to be ready before the real madness comes. It also presents an interesting dynamic of making sure that your hand is full and that you have some energy ready before you kill the last drone so that you are completely ready for the queen, which I think is pretty cool. I have some additional ideas to add some complexity to her once everything else is balanced a bit better, but for now I'm actually pretty happy with how it turned out. With a boss in place, the groundwork is pretty much laid out for an actual full playthrough through the entire game. At this point, I had some time before any of my playtesters were able to sit down with me, so I did take the time to make a few other changes to fill the game out a bit. The rooms in the dungeon now generate in a more interesting way. Not only are they no longer confined to a square shape, but once the generation's done, I add in a smattering of extra connecting hallways so there's some loops and forks and alternate routes to wherever you might want to go. I'll eventually want to be a bit more smart with this, but for now the random approach is already adding a lot, I think. I've also added treasure rooms, where you'll be presented with a few rare cards to choose from. And speaking of which, I've made some improvements to the card rarity system. Cards are now one of 4 rarities: starter, common, uncommon, and rare. Starter cards are, as the name suggests, what you start with. They are pretty underwhelming now, and may become even more underwhelming as I balance things. But importantly, they'll never come up in room rewards, shops, or treasure rooms. I felt like this was important because I want every card that you gain right from the start to feel like an upgrade. If you beat the first room, and all 3 of your choices for the reward are just extra copies of a card you already have, it's kind of a letdown. Interestingly, this ended up causing a real problem since you start with 2 generate cards, and without thinking, I tagged them as starter cards, which meant that for the entire run, unless you got lucky and pulled a rare overcharge card, the only way to gain energy was those original 2 generate cards, plus burning whatever else you have. To fix this, I added a new starter card, Kindle, which gives you 2 energy, but it's a one-time use only. When you play it, it goes to the same pile as burned cards, and it can't be used until the next room. This means that you can still use any higher power cards that you get early, albeit only once or twice per room, but more importantly, it puts generate back into the pool for rewards and such, since it's now a common card again. It also emphasized to me again that one of the more pressing needs at the moment is to add some more interesting cards that give the player energy. I do have some ideas for that, hopefully they'll find their way into the next update or 2. I also made some changes to 2 of the enemies, the Brute and the Ranger. The brute now charges at you when it gets line of sight, which makes it much more interesting than just a waddling bullet sponge. The ranger was implemented pretty early on, and then I broke it making some other changes, so I was mostly just restoring basic functionality. The general consensus right now on these dudes is that they are potentially the hardest enemy in the entire game, potentially beating out the boss herself, but unfortunately they're not just hard, they also feel pretty unfair. If you roll these guys in an elite room, there's a pretty good chance that it just ends your run, even if you have built up a moderately decent deck. I'm planning to fix this mostly by balancing and making their AI a bit more responsive and realistic, like making them pause for a second before they fire, like they're aiming at you, instead of just letting loose the second they see you. Maybe make them move slower as they reload, that kind of thing. I also need to revisit my map generation code. It's letting elite rooms spawn way too close to the start room. Sometimes you even start in an elite room, which is not great. There was about a week and a half this month where I found myself really motivated to work on the game, but unfortunately I was so hopped up on cold meds that I was no good to anyone as a programmer. So instead I spent a ton of time looking at art. I've mentioned this in both of my last 2 devlogs, and at the risk of being annoying, I'm really sorry, but I'm gonna mention it here again. I'm really just still not happy with pretty much any of the art in the game. I've started saying that with the possible exception of some of the card art, probably none of the visuals in the game right now will make it into the final release. I've also seen a few really good talks and videos lately on the overuse of pixel art in indie games, and how it can really hurt your game and make it hard to stand out from the crowd, and unfortunately I kinda let it go to my head. Basically, I started to tell myself, you know, if I'm not happy with the art anyway, or the amount of time it takes me to make the art, and it's gonna hurt my game to have pixel art in it anyway, maybe I need to experiment with some different styles, see if I can't come up with something that comes easier to me and ideally makes it look a bit more distinct or unique. Long story short, I've tried a bunch of different art styles in the past month. I've got a whole list of different games that I've been impressed by and might want to pull inspiration from. I've installed several new programs on my computer to try, and my friends are probably just about sick of me spamming them with stuff and asking them to rate it out of 10. There's about 10 different renditions of the Caddisfly Queen that will never see the light of day. I even played for a few days with pivoting the entire game to 3D art. What I've sort of started to realize is that whether or not I want to admit it, what I've actually been looking for, at least on some level, is a shortcut. I know that if I'm planning to release this game at some point, I'm going to eventually need to start marketing it and showing it to people. But I've been afraid to do that until I'm happier with the visuals, and I've fallen into the trap of subconsciously hoping that I can just find an easy way to get it there. But if I'm realistic, that just isn't going to happen. And what's more, waiting for it to happen is probably going to hurt my game as much or even more than pixel art will. So then, the plan. Subject to change, but at least it'll keep me moving forward for now. I'm gonna stick with pixel art for this game. I'll keep an eye out for other styles that appeal to me, but they'll go on the maybe someday I'll make a sequel list, or just end up on other projects, who knows. I might try to make use of skeletal or cutout animations just to make it easier for me to animate with less time spent drawing the same thing over and over again, which has been one of my big frustrations. And I might also move to a slightly higher resolution pixel art just to see how it feels and if it potentially helps me look a bit less amateurish. I'm also going to try to do more with shaders, particles, and lighting effects to make the art that I do have look more interesting and dynamic. I'm currently about halfway through fixing all the issues and improvements that came up from this last playtest. Once I'm done with that, the next update will include a pass over all the art, reworking it, and getting it to a state that I'm hopefully at least not embarrassed by it. To keep myself motivated on that, the remainder of this art update will be new cards. Adding new cards has been one of my favorite parts of developing this game. It's really relatively little work for how rewarding it is. And I've got a whole list of cards that I want to add, so I think I'll just use that to give myself a break whenever I feel like I need a change, and I'll get through all the drawing, hopefully with a game that looks a lot more impressive and is a lot more ready for a scene page and trailers here in really not the too distant future. So yeah, thanks for watching.